HOA sold my lake cabin while I was gone for 48 hours. They thought they could erase me with a forged signature and a fast-talking investor, selling my lake cabin while I was gone for 2 days. But the moment I stepped back onto that porch and saw a stranger holding keys to my own home, I knew this fight wasn't about a cabin anymore. It was about the land beneath us, and the truth buried in it. If you stand for justice the way I did, hit subscribe and stick around. These HOA power trips only get wilder from here. The gravel on the old lake road always made a familiar crunch beneath my tires, a sound I'd heard since I was a boy riding shotgun with my father. But that afternoon, as my pickup rolled toward the cabin, the sound felt different, hollow, uneasy, like the land itself was warning me. The pine trees along Clearwater Lake leaned in with their long shadows, and the blue water flickered between them like a restless heartbeat. I'd only been gone for 2 days, just long enough to pick up lumber and supplies from town. The cabin should have been exactly the way I left it, quiet, still, waiting for me the way it always had. Instead, a stranger was standing on my front porch, holding a ring of keys. He was tall, clean-shaven, city slick in a charcoal blazer that didn't belong anywhere near Montana dust. Through the windshield, I watched him jiggle one of the keys into my door lock like he'd done it 100 times. My chest tightened. My dog's metal water bowl sat on the porch. The canoe was still tied to the dock, and my tools leaned against the wall beneath the window where I'd left them. Nothing about this place said abandoned. Nothing said for sale. Nothing said his. I killed the engine, stepped out of the truck, and the wind caught the edge of my jacket like it was urging me forward. "Hey," I called, boots striking the earth hard and fast. "Can I help you?" The man didn't even flinch. He turned with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You must be Elias Ward. I'm Gavin Rourke. I just bought this cabin." The words didn't make sense at first. They hung there, warped by the breeze off the lake. Bought. Cabin. Mine. Before I could answer, another voice, sharp and sugary, cut through the air. "Elias, you're back early!" HOA President Marcia Dwyer stepped out from behind Gavin like a stage cue. She wore her usual pastel sweater, pearls, and that thin-lipped smile she used whenever she was about to ruin someone's week. "What's going on here, Marcia?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. She lifted the clipboard she carried everywhere. The one she acted like was a badge, a Bible, and a weapon all at once. "We followed protocol. You failed to meet aesthetic compliance standards, dock color, vegetation height, structural uniformity. After 30 days without a response, the property was deemed abandoned. HOA bylaws allow us to liquidate abandoned assets." I blinked at her. "Marcia, I was gone for 48 hours. "We posted notices," she chirped, "clear as day." My stomach twisted. No one had posted anything here. Not on my door, not on my gate, not anywhere. I would have seen it. My cabin wasn't just a building. It was my wife Denise's favorite place on earth, the one spot she said made the world feel gentle again. I never let a single piece of paper sit on that property without knowing exactly what it was. Behind me, a sheriff's cruiser eased down the road. Sheriff Cole Branton stepped out, dust brushing off his hat as he approached. "Afternoon," he said, eyeing Marcia, then Gavin, then me. "Got a call about a trespasser on sold property." Sold property. The words felt like splinters under the skin. Gavin crossed his arms. "Sheriff, this man is refusing to vacate. The sale was processed through the HOA. I have the contract and keys." I watched Marcia beam like she'd just handed out candy at a parade. Sheriff Cole sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Elias, you got paperwork showing otherwise?" I swallowed hard, the lake wind cold on my back. "Sheriff, I didn't sell this place. Not now, not ever." "Well," Marcia said sweetly, "you'll need proof of ownership. Our records show transfer of authority. Every muscle in my jaw tightened. Something was wrong. Stone cold, calculated wrong. The water behind us rippled, dark and restless. My cabin, every board, every nail, every memory, was being taken from me in broad daylight. Sheriff Cole stepped closer. Elias, until we see documentation, I'm gonna need everyone calm. Calm. That was the last thing I felt. But I took a slow breath and opened the passenger door of my truck. The manila folder sitting on the seat wasn't for this. At least I hadn't thought so. Not today. But like my father always said, land remembers its owner, and sometimes the law just needs reminding. I looked up at Marcia, her smug smile, her grip tightening on that clipboard as if she'd already won. Gavin jingled the keys again like he thought ownership was measured in metal. And then I held up the folder. Sheriff, I said, my voice low but steady, before we go any further, you might want to take a look at this. Marcia's smile faltered for the first time, just a tiny crack in the veneer she wore like armor. The breeze off Clearwater Lake rustled the pages on her clipboard, and for the first time I saw something flicker in her eyes. Uncertainty. Sheriff Cole took the manila folder from my hand, his boots grinding softly against the gravel as he stepped back toward his cruiser to lean on the hood for a better look. The lake wind carried the scent of cold water and pine, and somewhere far across the surface a loon called out, long and hollow, as if announcing a shift none of us were ready for. Inside the folder were the documents I'd kept for years, copies of the lakebed rights, shoreline deeds, pump station easements, and submerged property claims. Papers most people never think about. Papers that developers overlook when they're in a hurry. Papers that HOAs don't know exist when they think they run the world. Sheriff Cole thumbed through the stack slowly, the expression on his face turning from polite lawman neutrality to something closer to alarm. Elias, he muttered, the cadence of his voice changing. You own the lake? Not just the lakes, I said, speaking quietly, letting the truth settle like dust on an old shelf. The bed under it, the shore on this side, and the pump station access your HOA uses every time they draw water for the clubhouse. Bought it all 12 years ago, legal, filed, and recorded. Marcia straightened her shoulders, but her voice wavered. That's impossible. The developer, he would have... He didn't, I said. He built a neighborhood on borrowed land without checking the fine print. Gavin shifted his weight, keys clicking against his palm. This doesn't change the fact that your cabin was sold under HOA procedures. I stepped closer, feeling the grit of the earth under my boots, the cold air sharpening my words. You can't sell something you never had a claim to, Gavin. And you, I nodded toward Marcia, can't enforce bylaws on land that predates your entire subdivision. That cabin has stood here since 1964. Your HOA was founded in 2011. The sheriff looked up at her. Marcia, did you know any of this? She didn't answer. Her grip tightened on the clipboard until her knuckles went pale. The wind fluttered her neatly pressed hair, and for the first time since I'd met her, she seemed small against the backdrop of the lake. I followed protocol, she repeated. But this time her voice was thin, brittle. We posted notices on the door. No, you didn't. I pointed toward the wooden door behind Gavin. Show me the nail holes. Show me the tape marks. Show me anything. There weren't any. Sheriff Cole saw that too. He let out a long breath through his nose. I'm gonna need to make some calls. This is a mess. A long silence settled over the porch, the kind that makes a man hear his heartbeat. The water lapped gently against the dock, as if waiting for the next move. Gavin checked his watch, growing impatient. Sheriff, with all due respect, my purchase contract may not mean diddly if it was based on false authority, the sheriff cut in. I'm not making any rulings today, but nobody's getting removed from anywhere until we understand what's what. Marcia opened her mouth to protest, but the sheriff held up a hand. Enough. I need to verify these documents, speak with county records, figure out who authorized what. Everybody stay put. Nobody escalates anything. He walked to his cruiser, radio crackling as he slid inside. I watched him drive away, his taillights fading into the line of pines. The road dust hung in the air long after he'd gone. Gavin turned toward me, his calm mask slipping into irritation. You should have disclosed this when I made my offer. There was no offer, I said. You barged onto my porch. Marcia stepped closer, her perfume too sweet for the cold air. Elias, be reasonable. The HOA only wants consistency and order. Your cabin doesn't fit the aesthetic standard because it's older than your entire neighborhood, I snapped, and older than your bylaws, and older than the people enforcing them. She narrowed her eyes, false confidence trying to regrow. These technicalities won't protect you forever. Behind her, the lake shimmered under the pale afternoon sun, quiet and unbothered, like a witness patient enough to outlive every argument. I didn't answer. I walked past both of them, up the steps of my own porch, and placed my hand on the worn wooden doorframe, the same frame Denise leaned on every summer morning when she'd sip her coffee and watch the light dance across the water. I felt the grain beneath my fingertips, the years carved into it, the memory of peace it once held. Marcia took a few steps down the path, muttering under her breath as she dialed someone on her phone. Gavin followed her, already whispering about next steps and financial losses. Their voices drifted away as the wind picked up again. I walked to the edge of the porch and looked at the lake, calm, clear, reflecting the sky like a truth nobody could argue with. They thought they could erase me with a clipboard. They thought a forged notice and a fast-talking developer could make me disappear. But this lake wasn't theirs. It wasn't the HOA's. It wasn't the developers. It wasn't even Gavin's fantasy investment. It was mine. Every inch of it, every ripple, every buried utility line, every legal right stretching back farther than they were willing to research. And they had no idea what else was in that folder. That thought stayed with me long after Marcia and Gavin marched back toward the paved road that led into Clearwater Ridge. The sunset was sliding behind the tree line, staining the lake in dark copper streaks. A colder wind picked up, brushing across the water and rattling the dock planks gently. I stood there a while, listening to the creak of wood, the soft lick of waves, and the restless whisper of pines. It was the sound of home, the sound they were trying to claim as their own. By morning, the HOA had regrouped. It started with a white envelope pinned to my wooden gate with a bright red thumbtack. Notice of infraction, unapproved vegetation height. I stared at the paper, its crisp edges fluttering like a flag of unwanted war. The pine needles around my gate had grown maybe an inch since last week. Not exactly a crime in Montana. But the HOA made it sound like I'd planted a wildfire. 2 hours later, another envelope arrived. This one cited me for reflective water disturbance. I held it up, reading the wording twice. They were fining me because the sun reflected off my dock in a way that, apparently, caused aesthetic disharmony with community guidelines. I let out a humorless laugh. Aesthetic disharmony, I muttered. That's a new one. Midday, a third envelope showed up, this time taped to the side of my mailbox. Dock color non-compliant. My dock was the same faded cedar brown it had been for 20 years, but the HOA had recently decided that all docks needed to match a uniform willow taupe shade, as if this lake cared about taupe. I tugged the paper free and looked around. The gravel driveway was empty, the trees still, but I could feel eyes on me. Someone had driven by, snapped a photo, and run. The HOA didn't always need to confront you. Sometimes they preferred to sting you with paper cuts, tiny slashes of authority that piled up until they bled. By the afternoon, I drove into town for groceries. On the way back, I spotted a dark SUV parked at the curve where my private road met the public one. Its windows were tinted, and the engine was off. The vehicle didn't move even when I slowed. I drove past slowly, letting the gravel crunch beneath my tires like a warning. The SUV remained still, watching. The first time, I brushed it off as coincidence. The second time, not so much. When I reached my cabin again, the wind had picked up. Dust swirled down the driveway, and the lake rippled in restless silver waves. I stepped out with the grocery bags and nearly tripped over something at the edge of the porch. A for sale sign lay flat on the boards. My stomach tightened. I hadn't put that there. I hadn't authorized it. Someone had come onto my property, hammered the sign into the ground, then either changed their mind or been interrupted. The wooden stake had fresh dirt on it, proof it had been planted not long ago. I picked it up and turned it over, reading the name of some realtor I'd never heard of. At the bottom, in tiny print, was a QR code linking to a listing that claimed my cabin was priced to sell quickly. I felt heat rise in my chest. They were trying to push me out, one little shove at a time. "Elias?" a voice called out behind me. I turned to see Lila Mercer standing near the gate. She was holding her coat close against the wind, her expression uneasy. Lila lived 2 parcels over, on the last stretch of lakefront the HOA managed to swallow up before their expansion hit legal limits. She was young, maybe mid-30s, with a little girl who liked to fish from her tiny pier. "What's going on?" she asked. "I saw Marcia's car up here yesterday, then that SUV parked by the turnoff." I leaned the for sale sign against the porch railing. "They've been busy." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Elias, be careful. They did this to my neighbor last year. Fines, accusations, false reports, until he just moved away. They say things quietly so nobody notices, but I've noticed." The wind blew her dark hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear. "Marcia runs the HOA like a kingdom. And Gavin, well, nobody knows what he's after, but it can't be good." I studied her for a moment. She wasn't lying. There was real worry in her eyes. "Lila, have you ever seen them target someone this fast?" She shook her head. "Not like this. They're scared of something. And when people like them get scared, they get bold." I looked out at the lake again. The water churned softly beneath the dock. A storm cloud was moving in from the west, dark and thick, rolling across the mountains like a slow-moving herd. "You said they targeted your neighbor," I said. "What happened to him?" Lila hesitated. "He fought back, brought paperwork, deeds, receipts, but the HOA had already filed so many complaints that the county launched an investigation. Even though he did nothing wrong, he got tired, sold cheap, left the state." "Did he own his land?" "Yes." "And they still forced him out?" She nodded. The storm cloud groaned with distant thunder. I exhaled slowly. "Not this time." Lila stepped back, glancing nervously down the road. "Just watch your back. They don't act alone. Someone's helping them." After she left, I walked around the entire cabin, checking the windows, the shed, the dock. Everything looked untouched, but I felt the invisible pressure of eyes watching from the tree line. The kind of presence you don't see, but you know is there. The wind kicked up sharply, slamming a loose shutter against the wall. I steadied it, the wood cold beneath my hand. The lake churned, restless as the sky darkened. Back inside, I spread the HOA notices across the kitchen table. Red ink, bold stamps, threatening language. They'd crafted them carefully, enough to intimidate, but not enough to incriminate themselves outright. Paper cuts, quiet threats, each one sharper than it looked. I took a breath, steady and deep. This wasn't random. This wasn't sloppy. This was coordinated. They weren't acting alone. And somewhere behind the scenes, someone was pulling strings tight enough to snap. That truth settled in my gut like a stone as the afternoon light dimmed and the lake took on a slate-colored sheen. The wind had shifted, colder, sharper, pushing long ripples toward the marsh grass near the far bank. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching storm clouds gather over the mountains. Everything around me felt unsettled, as if the whole valley knew what I was about to learn next. The next morning, Rhett Callahan showed up unannounced. His old county surveyor truck rolled up the gravel drive, coughing dust behind it. I hadn't seen him in a few months, but he stepped out the same as always, broad-shouldered, gruff beard, boots worn down by 40 years of walking property lines most people never knew existed. He held a folder under his arm, his steps quick and angry. "Elias," he said, voice low, "you're not gonna like this." He followed me inside, brushing pine needles from his jacket, before setting the folder down on the kitchen table. The storm outside grew louder, tapping rain against the windows like impatient fingers. I opened the folder, slowly, carefully, because Rhett wasn't one to overreact. Inside were copies of HOA paperwork, but not just fines or warnings. These were forms I'd never seen before. Notice of non-response. Confirmation of owner silence. Abandonment claim. Each page bore my name, my address, my parcel number, and at the bottom of the final page, a signature. My signature. Only it wasn't. It was smoother, loopier, nothing like the blocky print I'd always used. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. "Where did you get these?" Rhett crossed his arms. "County office. Someone filed them last week. Perfect timing for Marcia's little property sale stunt." My breath came tight. She forged everything. "Not just her," Rhett said. "This took coordination. Someone with access. Someone who knew what boxes to check and where to drop the forms without raising suspicion." The storm cracked loudly overhead, the thunder rattling the cabinets. We both turned as another gust slammed the shutters outside. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls had drawn closer. I flipped through the pages again. Dates, letterheads, stamps. "Rhett, these look official." He nodded grimly. "They look official because someone wanted them to. That's not amateur work." A chill ran across the back of my neck. "This means they didn't just misinterpret the law. They committed fraud." "Right," Rhett said. "And that means you've been targeted." Lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in a harsh blue glare. For a moment I saw the reflection of the papers on the window. My name, my parcel, someone else's handwriting, pretending to be mine. I felt the explosion inside me then. Not loud, but deep. Quiet fury hardening in the chest. Before I could speak, a sharp noise echoed outside. Metal hitting wood. We both froze. Another sound, lighter this time, like someone stepping on wet leaves. I grabbed my coat and moved toward the back door, motioning for Rhett to stay behind. The rain had turned steady, pattering against the metal gutters. The air outside smelled of pine sap and wet soil, sharp and cold. I rounded the corner of the cabin and saw movement near the shed. A hooded figure bolted from the shadows. "Hey!" I shouted, but the storm swallowed my voice. The figure stumbled, dropping something that clanged loudly against the ground, a long pry bar, before sprinting toward the tree line. The rain blurred their outline before the darkness swallowed them whole. I didn't chase. Not in this storm, not on this terrain. But my heartbeat pounded heavy as I picked up the pry bar. The handle was slick with rain, the metal cold as lake water. Rhett came running out. What happened? Someone was in the shed. I turned the tool in my hand, trying to get in again. Again. The word hung there. We rushed to the shed, its latch dangled crooked, fresh scratches gouged into the wood. The break-in wasn't random, it wasn't petty, someone was searching for something. Inside, muddy footprints dotted the floorboards, heavy, size 11 maybe, Whoever it was stepped straight to the corner where I kept old lockboxes and crates. Most were untouched, but one crate had been pried open, splintered along the edge. The only thing inside it had been old fishing gear. They'd been looking for something else entirely. Rhett looked at the crate, then the footprints, then the pry bar in my hand. They're getting desperate. I nodded. They're escalating. A rumble of thunder rolled across the lake. Rain drummed harder on the tin roof. I moved back to the house, feeling the storm seep into my bones. Rhett followed me in, watching me with those same surveyor eyes he used when he sensed a boundary line about to be crossed. "You're gonna need help," he said. "This isn't just HOA nonsense anymore. This is criminal." "I know," I said quietly. "And whoever forged those documents, they're not done." Rhett put a hand on my shoulder. "I'll help you map everything. Every inch of land they claim. Every line they've crossed." I nodded. "Tomorrow." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the lake outside. The waves churned violently, slamming against the pilings of the dock. It looked like the water itself was angry. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then I said what we were both thinking. If they forged abandonment, what else did they fake? Rhett didn't answer. The storm answered for him, thunder cracking across the mountains like a warning shot from the sky. That night, sleep never found me. Every time lightning flashed across the lake, I pictured the forged signature on those papers, neat loops and flourishes pretending to be mine. Each stroke of ink felt like someone chiseling away at my identity, trying to remove me from the land one document at a time. The storm finally eased close to dawn, leaving behind a cold mist that crawled low over the water. By morning, Rhett was already walking the property line, with his old canvas satchel slung over his shoulder, a thermos in one hand, rolled maps tucked under his arm. The man had spent half his life surveying Montana backroads and forgotten lots, and he moved with the confidence of someone who trusted the land more than people. I followed him, the wet grass brushing against my boots, patches of fog rising around us like breath. "We're gonna map everything," he said, planting a bright orange survey marker into the dirt. "Every inch they think they control, every boundary they pretended didn't exist." The morning air was crisp, filled with the smell of damp pine and fresh earth. The lake behind us rippled with the soft push of a breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, circling above the tree line. Rhett unrolled one of the old county maps across a portable board he carried. "Your parcel," he said, tapping with a pencil, "predates the Clearwater Ridge development by nearly 40 years. But look here. Look where their clubhouse sits." I leaned closer, breath catching. The red square marking the HOA clubhouse was planted squarely on a section of my lakebed parcel, extending into what should have been protected shoreline. "They built it on my land," I said quietly. "Not just that," he muttered, flipping to another sheet. "Their sewer lift station? On your utility easement. Their entrance gate? On your access road. And half their streetlights? Anchored right into your shoreline buffer." The wind picked up, rustling the edges of the map like the land itself was agreeing. "And this," he added, pulling out a third sheet. "This is the kicker." He pointed at a cluster of small utility notations, barely legible. "The pump station they use for clubhouse sprinklers and water features, it's on submerged land you own." I stepped back, staring out at the lake, the stillness betraying none of the war brewing beneath its mirrored surface. "They've built their whole neighborhood on my land, without checking anything." Rhett nodded. "Because they assumed no one would challenge them. HOAs think their bylaws outrank everything. But deeds are older. Deeds win." I felt something shift inside me, a slow-burning calm, the kind a man feels when the tide finally turns. Not triumph, not yet, but the first hint of leverage, We spent the entire morning marking boundaries. Orange stakes dotted the shoreline, tiny sparks of color against the fog. Rhett measured each point with the precision of a man who'd made truth his profession. As we worked, traffic picked up on the HOA road across the lake. Silver SUVs, golf carts, uniform landscaping trucks. Folks moving with the nervous energy of bees stirred from a hive. Word must have spread. Perhaps Marcia was already panicking. By noon, we reached the far end of the property, near the old rusted fence line where the ground dipped toward marshy grass. As I lifted another marker, tires crunched on gravel behind us. I turned to see a black SUV idling at the end of the lane, the same one that had appeared twice before. The window didn't roll down. No one stepped out. Rhett squinted, wiping rain residue from his brow. That the same car? Yeah, I said. Third time now. The SUV lingered another few seconds, then backed up slowly and disappeared down the road. Its tires left wet tracks in the dirt, but the silence it left behind felt heavier. They're watching, Rhett said. I know. Means you're getting close. I know that too. We returned to the cabin, our boots leaving damp prints across the porch. The scent of wet cedar filled the air, thick, grounding. I spread the newly marked maps across the kitchen table. Orange dots marked every intrusion, every overreach, every boundary they'd crossed. I stared at the maps, hands braced on the table. This is enough to file a preliminary theft complaint. Rhett nodded. More than enough. They've encroached on your land in at least 6 places, built structures without permission, used utilities without easement. This isn't some misunderstanding. This is actionable. Thunder murmured again in the distance, softer now, like a grudge. I picked up the marker pen and circled the clubhouse, the sewer station, the entrance gate. They thought they could take everything from me, but they built their empire on my ground. And now, Rhett said, folding his arms, you're gonna take it back. I exhaled slowly, the weight of what came next settling over me like cold evening mist. Legal battles, county filings, meetings. But all of it was on my side. Not because of emotion, not because of anger, but because the land itself held the truth. A truth they never bothered to check. The cabin creaked softly as the wind eased. Somewhere outside, a loon cried again, long, low, and eerie. A warning, maybe an omen. I picked up the folder of forged documents, held it beside the maps, and felt the tension shift to something steadier, sharper. Lines in the dirt weren't just boundaries. They were battle lines, bright orange markers staking the truth into the soil, each one a tiny flag, in a war the HOA didn't realize they'd already started losing. By the next morning, the storm clouds had drifted east, leaving behind a wide, pale blue sky and a crisp chill in the air. A thin mist hovered above Clearwater Lake, curling upward like smoke from some long, finished fire. The land felt clean, washed, ready, as if it knew what was coming. I stepped onto the dock with a thermos in hand, letting the old boards creak beneath my boots. The lake water shimmered in soft silver ripples, catching the early sunlight. It was the kind of calm that makes a man feel steady again. The kind of calm I needed before I set the next part of the plan in motion. At 9 sharp, a black SUV, not the same one that had been watching, pulled up my gravel road. This time I knew who it was. Camille Stratton stepped out, sunglasses tucked into her hair, windbreaker flapping softly in the breeze. She had the posture of someone used to dealing with land disputes, investors, county boards, and stubborn old men with property grudges. Her boots were clean but rugged, the kind worn by people who knew how to walk muddy terrain without complaining. "Morning, Elias," she said, extending her hand. "Beautiful place you've got here." "Morning, Camille," I replied. "Thanks for coming." She glanced around, the weathered cabin, the shimmering water, the stretch of pines hugging the shoreline. I can see why someone would try to take it. I motioned her toward the table I'd set up on the porch. Rhett had left me the maps from yesterday, rolled, sorted, and labeled. I unrolled them one by one as she sipped the coffee I offered. This, I said, tapping the first map, is the official record of Clearwater Ridge's infrastructure footprint. And this, I tapped the second, is what they actually built on. Camille leaned in, her brow furrowing. They're way over their boundaries. Way beyond, I said. Their clubhouse is on my land. Their sewer lift station is on my land. Even their entrance gate is sitting on a right-of-way they never asked permission to use. She nodded slowly. And you want to leverage this? I want to end their interference once and for all. But I can't do it alone. They've forged documents, committed fraud, filed false abandonment, and from the looks of it, they've got someone funding their moves. Camille set down her coffee. The wind brushed through her hair as she scanned each map again. Elias, you know my interest is the lake, the marina project on the far side of the ridge. She pointed toward the eastern shoreline. It's been tied up for a year because Clearwater Ridge claims the access roads fall under their HOA authority. They don't, I said. Not anymore. I slid a third document toward her. The lakebed rights deed, stamped by the state and signed off 12 years ago. Her eyes widened slightly. You own the entire lakebed on this side? She asked. And the submerged easements, I replied. Plus the pump station parcel. No one checked when they built Clearwater Ridge. They assumed the county owned it. Camille let out a low whistle. That's incredible. It's leverage, I corrected. And I think we can use it to solve both our problems. She crossed her arms, leaning back slightly. What exactly are you proposing? I pointed to the map showing the HOA's utilities. They're relying on land they don't own, on easements they've never legally secured. If the right entity held long-term control of these sections, the HOA loses all leverage, she finished, a slow smile forming. They'd be forced into compliance. Or, I added, into dissolution. The lake breeze swept between us, carrying the faint scent of pine and cold water. A single loon drifted near the cattails, silent but watchful. Camille lifted one of the maps. If I were to lease this land from you, the gate parcel, the clubhouse parcel, the utilities, then Clearwater Ridge would have to negotiate with me every time they wanted to flush a toilet or turn on a streetlight. I nodded. You'd hold their foundation. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Elias, this is legally devastating. It's fair, I said. They're trying to take my home with forged signatures and fake abandonment. I'm just protecting what's mine. Camille tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. I can draft a 25-year lease on the infrastructure parcels today. My attorneys will handle filings with the county. But Elias, she looked at me, serious now. This will make them panic. You need to be ready for a fight. I've been ready, I said. They targeted the wrong man. By mid-afternoon, her legal team arrived. 2 attorneys in boots and windbreakers carrying tablets and binders. We signed preliminary agreements on the porch while the breeze kept flipping the pages. They recorded every detail, every parcel number, every boundary. As they worked, I noticed movement across the water. A group of Clearwater Ridge residents stood near their clubhouse watching us from a distance. Some held their phones up, some pointed. Others just stared, confused or worried. Camille's crew walked the shoreline, marking the new leased parcels with surveying flags. Every flag that hit the dirt made the residents noticeably more agitated. Good. They were starting to realize the ground under their perfect lawns wasn't theirs. Around 4 p.m., Marcia's golf cart came zooming down the HOA path, swerving sharply as she reached the shoreline. She stepped out, waving her clipboard like a weapon. You can't do this! This is HOA-protected land. Who are you people? What authority are you acting under? Camille didn't flinch. She handed Marcia a neatly printed packet. State-verified deed records. and a long-term lease agreement signed today. The land under your clubhouse, your utilities, and your gate now falls under Stratton Eco Marina Holdings. Marcia's face drained of color. You can't. That's not. It's very legal, Camille replied calmly. Feel free to verify with the county on Monday. Marcia looked at me, shock twisting into fury. Elias, what have you done? Protected my home, I said. Her eyes darted to the survey flags lining the water, marking the truth she'd ignored for years. This isn't over, she hissed. It's just beginning, I answered. She stormed off, muttering under her breath, her golf cart spitting gravel as she tore back up the road. Camille closed her briefcase. You've got them shaking. Good, I said quietly, watching the last of the survey flags flutter in the wind. Because fear makes desperate people make desperate mistakes, and desperate mistakes always reveal the truth. I kept replaying that thought in my mind as dusk settled over Clearwater Lake. The water turned dark copper beneath the sinking sun, faint ripples stretching out like veins under its surface. The air carried a strange tension, quiet but charged, as if the land itself sensed the next move before I did. I'd expected retaliation, but not the kind that came next. The following morning, I woke to 3 voicemails and 1 certified envelope shoved through my gate's iron latch. All 3 voicemails were from county offices I hadn't spoken with in years. Their messages were clipped, formal, and unsettling. Mr. Ward, we received a request to freeze all activity on your shoreline due to an environmental preservation emergency. Another said, your property is now considered part of the Blue Heron Wetland Trust. Any construction, lease modification, or land alteration is temporarily prohibited. And the last, we need clarification regarding your recent filings. The emergency environmental petition contradicts your deed. I stood on the porch, listening to each message twice. The early morning fog drifted low around the dock, thick enough to soften the shoreline's edges. It felt like the world was muffled, muted, just for a moment, before the hammer fell. A wetland trust, emergency freeze, contradicting my deed. It didn't take long to guess who was behind it. I tore open the certified envelope. Inside was a county signatory notice declaring that all land rights under parcel series LC41B, my shoreline, were frozen pending ecological review. And at the bottom, in small black print, the filing authority glared up at me. Blue Heron Wetland Trust, filed by Gavin Rourke. My jaw clenched. I read the name again, just to feel the anger sharpen. Gavin, the man who tried to take my cabin with forged paperwork, had escalated to forging an entire environmental trust, and worse, the county had approved it. I stepped off the porch, boots sinking into dew-heavy soil, and made my way toward the shed. A crow cawed from the tree line, then another. The air felt too still. As I neared the door, something didn't sit right. The padlock was crooked, not broken, not cut, just wrong. I moved closer, and that's when I saw the fresh scrape marks on the latch. Faint, sharp, not there yesterday. Damn it, I muttered, pushing the door open. The hinges groaned in protest. Inside, scattered mud streaks covered the floorboards. Footprints, heavy ones, tracked across the planks. Dust particles floated in the narrow beam of light coming through the single window. And there, right where I kept the fireproof storage chest with decades of paperwork, the lid hung open. Empty. My stomach dropped. Deeds, survey certificates, old notarized land transfers, historical water rights. Originals, all gone. I swallowed a surge of cold panic and forced myself to think clearly. Rhett and I had digital copies of everything, but the originals? Some county boards still respected paper more than screens. Without them, Disputes always took longer. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for. I backed out of the shed, scanning the ground for more prints. The mud was too disturbed to tell direction, just erratic imprints from someone moving fast, anxious. But as I stepped deeper into the yard, my porch camera clicked on with a soft chime, the security system. I rushed inside, flicked on the monitor, and pulled up the overnight feed. The interface blinked, loading the previous night's motion triggers. One timestamp in particular made my pulse quicken. 3:13 a.m. I clicked it. The playback opened on grainy but clear footage of someone slipping around the side of my cabin. Hood up, black jacket, gloves, flashlight beam trembling as the figure approached the shed. The camera caught the glint of a tool, a small crowbar, familiar, like the one dropped during the last break-in attempt. The figure moved quickly, breath visible in the cold air. They yanked open the shed door, rifled through boxes, found the storage chest, and removed every document inside. Then they hauled the files to a black SUV parked just off the driveway, the same SUV that had been watching us earlier. Then the figure stepped into the headlight beam just enough to turn their face. My breath hitched. It was Gavin. No mask. No attempt to hide. Just the arrogance of a man who believed he'd already won. I downloaded the footage onto a flash drive immediately. Evidence. The kind no HOA meeting could erase and no forged signature could override. When I stepped outside again, the sun had fully risen, burning off the fog and exposing the lake in bright, cold clarity. But the air still felt heavy, as if waiting for something else to drop. Rhett arrived shortly after, his boots crunching over the gravel. "Got your message. What happened?" I handed him the envelope from the county. "They froze my land." He scanned it, muttering a string of curses under his breath. "This trust is fake. I checked the state directory an hour ago. No such group exists." I pulled out the flash drive. "And Gavin broke into the shed last night." Rhett's eyes hardened. "Then we're past HOA nonsense. He's building a case, Elias, a fake one. If he can attack your credibility, your deed, your ownership, your filings, he can wedge enough doubt to stall everything." I nodded, but he slipped up. "How?" "He didn't know I had cameras." Rhett cracked a rare smile. "That'll bury him." But the smile faded quickly as he studied the envelope again. "We need a lawyer. One who knows environmental law, property law, and isn't afraid of a fight." I exhaled. "I know who to call." He looked at me sharply. "You sure? Bringing him in? That means you're committing to this." "I committed the moment they forged my name." The lake breeze shifted again, carrying the faint smell of rain even though the skies were clear. A sign of another storm coming. Only this time, it wasn't weather. It was legal. It was deliberate. And it was going to hit hard. I felt that truth in my bones, the way you feel a storm before it ever shows its face. The lake looked deceptively calm that morning. Thin bands of silver stretching across the surface, pine needles drifting quietly in the shallows. But beneath that calm, the current tugged harder than usual, restless and cold. I knew exactly how it felt. I spent the next few hours gathering everything I had left. Digital backups, Rhett's new surveys, the flash drive with Gavin's break-in footage, Camille's lease agreements, notarized copies of my lakebed rights, and every HOA notice they'd ever shoved into my mailbox. My kitchen table looked like a legal war room, papers laid out beneath the soft glow of the overhead lamp, the smell of old ink mixing with the scent of cedar walls and cold air creeping in from the cracks. By noon, my attorney, Sylvia Drummond, pulled into the driveway. She was a small woman, in a charcoal coat, with eyes that could cut through steel, and a voice calm enough to steady a landslide. She'd handled environmental cases for 30 years, long before most HOAs even existed. She stepped inside without ceremony, scanning the table. "You weren't exaggerating," she murmured. They forged abandonment documents, created a fake trust, filed an injunction, broke into your shed, and stole original deeds. All in 1 week, I said. She nodded grimly. This isn't HOA overreach. This is organized fraud. Outside, the wind rustled the pine branches, scattering needles across the porch. The cold smell of the lake drifted inside with each draft. Sylvia adjusted her glasses and tapped the flash drive. This footage, she said, changes everything. Judges don't like liars, but they really don't like criminals pretending to be victims. I exhaled, tension loosening from my shoulders. So we still have a chance? A chance? Sylvia replied. Elias, we have leverage. Leverage. The word felt like a door cracking open in a dark room. She spent the next hour reviewing maps and cross-referencing county plats with Rhett's updated drawings. When she reached the page showing the clubhouse built directly on my parcel, she shook her head slowly. They've been operating illegally for years, and now you've leased the land underneath them to a private entity with its own legal rights. Camille doesn't play lightly, I said. She'll hold them accountable. Good, Sylvia replied, because once this hits court, the HOA is going to crumble. The hum of her SUV broke the quiet as we drove to the county courthouse. Downtown Clearwater was small, just a strip of old brick storefronts, a diner with a neon sign that flickered at the corners, and the courthouse sitting at the far end with its faded white columns. The sky above it was a dull gray, heavy with the weight of what was coming. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old books and floor polish. HOA members had gathered in clusters, some whispering urgently, some pale, some curious. Marcia stood near the doors in her pearl necklace and immaculate sweater set, holding her clipboard like a security blanket. She avoided my eyes. Gavin was beside her, in a smooth navy suit, smiling like the hero of his own story. His hair was slicked back, jaw tight with arrogance. The judge called us in. The courtroom was a small wood-paneled chamber, sunlight filtering through high, narrow windows. Sheriff Cole sat in the back row, arms crossed, watching everything with a quiet, simmering patience. Case number 23-119, the clerk read. Ward versus Clearwater Ridge Homeowners Association. Sylvia stood. Your Honor, we'd like to introduce a series of exhibits demonstrating fraud, forgery, criminal trespass, and unauthorized land use. Gavin's attorney, some suit from out of county, rose immediately. Objection. The plaintiff seeks to overwhelm the record with irrelevant claims unrelated to property transfer procedures. Counselor, the judge cut in. Sit down. We're going to hear every piece. Sylvia plugged in the flash drive. The room fell silent. The video played on the screen. Gavin slipping behind my cabin, flashlight trembling, crowbar in hand. His face visible, his actions unmistakable. He broke into my shed, rifled through storage, stole files, and loaded them into his SUV. A gasp rolled through the courtroom. Marcia dropped her clipboard. Gavin's jaw clenched, his fake composure cracking like thin ice. The judge watched the footage with a slowly hardening expression. Mr. Rourke, he said, care to explain this? His attorney leaned in, whispering furiously. Gavin cleared his throat. I had reason to believe Mr. Ward was concealing documents related to a fraudulent land transfer. I was merely stealing, Sylvia interrupted calmly. Committing a felony break-in? Destroying original deeds? Filing forged environmental petitions? Gavin stiffened. Those petitions were legitimate. Sylvia lifted another exhibit. Your Honor, according to the state registry, the Blue Heron Wetland Trust does not exist, nor did it exist on the day this freeze was filed. And here, she held up more papers, is the sequence of digital footprints linking the submission directly to Mr. Rourke's personal computer. A heavy hush settled over the chamber, broken only by the faint ticking of the judge's old desk clock. Then Sylvia pulled out the environmental petition filing. And this signature, she said, placing it beside my real signature, is not Mr. Ward's. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, this was a coordinated attempt to steal his property. The judge looked at the forged paper, then at me, then back at Sylvia. Do you have more? Yes, she said, sliding forward the lease agreements. The land under Clearwater Ridge's clubhouse, gate, sewer lift station, and utility lines now belongs to Stratton Eco Marina Holdings, via a legal lease from Mr. Ward. A murmur rippled through the room. HOA members stiffened with shock. The judge leaned back. Is that so? Sylvia nodded. Your Honor, the HOA has been operating on land it never verified, never purchased, and never had rights to. And here, she tapped the deed copy, is the original lakebed rights the HOA overlooked entirely. Sheriff Cole stood from the back row. Your Honor, he said, our office is now in possession of stolen documents and verified footage of the defendant's break-in. We're prepared to move forward with criminal charges. The judge tapped his fingers on the bench, slowly, deliberately. Mrs. Dwyer, he said, turning toward Marcia. Did you authorize this sale? Were you aware your association was building and operating on land owned by Mr. Ward? Marcia's lips trembled. I trusted Mr. Rourke. He said he was helping us reclaim order. Order, the judge repeated coldly. By committing fraud? Marcia crumbled. Her shoulders sagged. Her pearls shook against her collarbone. The judge straightened in his seat. Effective immediately, he said loudly. This court halts all HOA authority pending full investigation. The sale of Mr. Ward's cabin is void. The environmental injunction is void. And Mr. Rourke, he paused, letting silence hang like a blade, is referred for criminal prosecution. A stunned stillness washed over the room. Then everything erupted at once. HOA members shouting in disbelief. Reporters in the back scrambling for photos. Marcia sinking into her seat. Gavin cursing under his breath as deputies approached. But I didn't move. Didn't speak. I just breathed. For the first time in weeks. A release. A tremor. A quiet victory. But as I stepped outside into the cold air, the camera crews swarming around me, a cold thought crept in. The HOA might be collapsing, but Gavin wasn't finished, and neither was the storm he'd set in motion. Even with the judge's ruling, even with the HOA in freefall, and Marcia clinging to the last shreds of authority, a knot pulled tight in my chest as I drove back toward the lake. The sky was an iron gray, heavy and low, the kind of sky that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Clearwater Lake stretched quietly beneath it, flat as glass, disturbed only by the cold wind brushing shallow ripples across its surface. Rhett met me at the cabin that evening, bringing chili from his wife's crockpot and a few words of plain comfort. You did good today, Elias, he said softly, sitting at my kitchen table. Judge shut him down hard. HOA's collapsing. Gavin's facing charges. You're on the right track. I nodded, but my eyes kept drifting to the dark window above the sink. I could see the faint reflection of the dock lantern out there. Steady, gentle, a small piece of peace in the middle of everything. He's not done, I murmured. He thought he could take my cabin, then my land. Men like him don't fold after one bad day in court. Rhett leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. He's out of moves. No, I said, staring at the window. He's out of legal moves. That's different. The wind pressed against the cabin walls with a hollow groan, shaking a few loose shingles. The air felt colder than the temperature should have allowed. Something about the night felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Like a deer freeze-framed just before the shot. When Rhett left just after 9, I walked him to his truck. The gravel crunched under our boots, the lake shifting in the distance with soft, dark waves. Lock up tight, he said. Call me if anything feels off. I will. But I didn't turn in for the night. Restlessness kept me awake. I walked the porch a few times, listening to the lake slap gently against the pilings. The cold carried the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace across the ridge. A dog barked in the distance. A faint hum, maybe from a boat engine somewhere far off, came and went on the wind. Then everything went silent. And that was the moment I felt it. A wrongness in the air. A shift. At 11:42 p.m., it arrived. A faint popping sound. Then another. I stepped to the edge of the porch, staring out into the dark. At first it looked like a lantern light flickering near my boathouse. But lanterns don't flicker orange, and they don't spread. The next second, flames crawled up the side of the boathouse, glowing brighter than the moonlit lake. Fire leapt along the wooden railings, hungry and fast. Heat hit my face, a dry, scorching wave that stole my breath. No, no, no! I ran down the steps, gravel shifting under my boots, heart slamming so hard I felt it in my teeth. The boathouse lit the water in violent reds and oranges, the flames reflecting in broken, trembling patterns. The fire roared louder, like a beast waking from sleep. Then came the engine. A black SUV shot out from the shadowed curve of the ridge road, tires spitting gravel as it fishtailed, headlights dark. It paused for only a second, long enough for the driver to glance back at the inferno, and then tore off into the night, disappearing behind the pines. I'd seen that SUV before, 3 times. Once parked at the road bend, once watching survey crews, and once stealing my documents. My breath hitched, anger and grief twisting into something deep and raw. "Gavin," I whispered. Flames climbed higher, snapping and crackling, sending sparks swirling into the night sky. The boathouse roof sagged in the heat. My hands shook as I ran for the garden hose, yanking it full length, spraying water toward the blaze. It hissed uselessly, swallowed by the inferno. Sirens wailed in the distance. Fire engines were on their way, but the boathouse was already collapsing inward, boards breaking with loud cracks that echoed over the lake. I kept spraying anyway, not ready to give up, not ready to let it burn, even though I knew it was beyond saving. My throat stung with smoke. My eyes watered. The heat was unbearable. "Elias!" Sheriff Cole's voice cut through the chaos. He ran from his cruiser, pulling me back just as a section of roof caved in. "It's too late!" he shouted over the roar. "Come on!" I staggered backward, breathing hard, the hose dangling helplessly from my hand. The boathouse was nothing now but a burning skeleton. The flames lit the entire shoreline, painting the water in bright, violent color. Embers floated upward like fireflies from hell. Cole guided me further from the heat. "We'll get whoever did this," he said. I didn't speak. I watched pieces of my life turn to ash. Old fishing gear. Denise's lake chair she used to sit on while reading. The oars my father carved with his own hands. Everything crackled and warped in the fire's mouth. But grief shifted, hardened. Because as the fire burned, something else emerged, half hidden under the falling structure. Old stone markers, ones I hadn't seen in years. The heat had burned away tall grass and brush, revealing a pair of boundary stones set deep into the ground. Cole noticed me staring. "What are those?" I knelt, brushing soot and charred grass aside. The stones were carved with shallow letters, almost too weathered to read, but not too weathered for someone who knew exactly what they were. "They're original shoreline markers," I said quietly. "From the 1940s. My grandfather's survey. These show the true boundary." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning my shoreline extends farther than any modern record shows, including under the HOA road." I looked up at the burning boathouse, the smoke rising into the dark sky like a signal flare. And under half their neighborhood, a gust of wind scattered glowing ashes across the lake. and one drifted near my boot before disappearing into the water with a soft hiss. Cole let out a low whistle. This changes everything. Yeah, I said, standing as the fire crews doused the last flames. It does. The fire had taken one structure, but it had revealed the truth. And truth, once uncovered, doesn't shrink back into the shadows. The morning after the fire, Clearwater Lake woke under a soft veil of smoke drifting low across the water. The ashes of my boathouse clung to the shoreline like black snow. The air held that scorched, metallic smell that lingers long after flames die. Yet beneath all that ruin, something steadier pulsed, a quiet resolve rising like heat from embers. I stood by the old stone markers, running my fingers along their weathered edges. They were colder than the morning air, carved with letters nearly erased by time, but even half-faded. Those letters told a story. That my grandfather's original shoreline extended far beyond modern maps, crossing under the HOA road, beneath the manicured lawns, and under the clubhouse sitting like a crown at Clearwater Ridge's entrance. Proof. Not speculation. Not claims. Proof carved in stone. By 10 a.m., Camille arrived with her legal team and a county historian. The historian knelt beside the markers, brushing away last night's ash with a small wooden tool. These are authentic, he said with a slow whistle. Pre-1950s. You can see the leveling style, rare for lakeside parcels this far north. This is original boundary work. Camille crossed her arms. Meaning Elias owns more shoreline than anyone realized. Meaning, the historian corrected gently, the HOA has been occupying land that was never theirs to touch. A cold wind swept across the lake, rippling the surface like a sheet of hammered metal. I watched the clubhouse across the water, a modern, boxy building with oversized windows and a ridiculous fountain out front, sitting smugly on land that no longer had the legal leg to stand on. Let's get to court, Camille said. The courthouse parking lot was already filling when we arrived. News vans lined the curb. Residents from Clearwater Ridge milled about, whispering, holding copies of the earlier news articles, pointing at us as we walked inside. Some looked anxious. Some looked angry. Some looked betrayed. They weren't wrong. Inside the courtroom, the mood was tighter than before. Tense, electric. Sheriff Cole nodded at me from his seat near the front, his hat resting on his lap. Sylvia, my attorney, arranged the new evidence on the desk with calm precision. Then the bailiff's voice echoed, "All rise." Judge Harmon entered. The new judge assigned after the previous one recused himself. He was an older man with steady eyes and a calm presence, the kind of judge who listened more than he spoke, the kind who didn't like games. He folded his hands. We reconvened to address additional evidence in Ward versus Clearwater Ridge. His gaze landed on me. "Mr. Ward, your counsel may begin." Sylvia stood. "Your Honor, after last night's fire, new evidence surfaced on Mr. Ward's property. Original boundary markers from the 1940s confirming expanded shoreline rights." She submitted photographs, historical maps, and the historian's sworn statement. The judge examined each page carefully. "This places nearly half of Clearwater Ridge's shoreline structures, including their main road and clubhouse, squarely on Mr. Ward's property," Sylvia continued. "Without easements, without permission, without legal standing." A murmur swept the room. Gavin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a stark contrast to the smug confidence he'd worn days earlier. His attorney leaned in, hissing sharp whispers. Even from across the room, I could see the panic tightening his jaw. Then Sylvia played the footage again. The break-in, the theft, the forged environmental trust. The courtroom watched every second in frozen silence. When it ended, even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder. Judge Harmon cleared his throat. "Mr. Rourke, do you wish to address this evidence?" Gavin stood, but his voice cracked. "Your Honor, I acted based on information provided by the HOA president. I believed Mr. Ward was committing. Sit down, the judge said, not unkindly, but firmly enough to snap Gavin's excuses in half. Then the judge turned to Marcia. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, pearls askew, hands shaking. Mrs. Dwyer, he said, were you aware the association lacked proper easements for its structures? She swallowed hard. I trusted Mr. Rourke. He said he handled the filings. So, you authorized the sale of a resident's cabin without verifying ownership? Her lip trembled. I just wanted order. The community was supposed to look a certain way. We had standards. Standards do not supersede property rights, the judge replied, or the law. He shuffled the papers, took a long breath, then delivered his ruling with the weight of a closing thunderclap. Effective immediately. The fraudulent sale of Mr. Ward's cabin is null and void. N. Clearwater Ridge. HOA is to be dissolved permanently. All assets owned by the HOA, including their clubhouse, front gate, undeveloped lots, and improvements, are to be liquidated to compensate damages. Mr. Rourke is referred to the district attorney for charges including fraud, document forgery, and criminal trespass. Mrs. Dwyer is barred from serving in any HOA leadership capacity statewide. The expanded shoreline rights revert fully to Mr. Ward. Gasps broke across the courtroom. Someone dropped a clipboard. One resident started crying. Another cursed under his breath. And me? I just breathed, because the storm they tried to drown me in had finally broken, and I was still standing. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones waving, cameras clicking. I answered a few questions, but most of my focus stayed on the lake visible in the distance, glimmering like it knew its truth had finally been heard. Over the next weeks, the neighborhood unraveled. Contractors arrived to assess the clubhouse. Law firms showed up to dissect liabilities. Residents packed up, grateful or furious, depending on the day. And Camille's marina plans moved forward, this time without obstruction. The land beneath the old HOA structures was reassigned to her company after liquidation. She insisted on buying the parcels from me properly, at full value. You earned this, she told me as she handed me the final contract. Not through revenge, through truth. I rebuilt slowly, choosing materials carefully. Cedar beams, hand-sanded decking, windows that opened wide to invite the lake breeze inside. Friends came to help. Rhett hauled lumber. Sheriff Cole hammered posts. Camille donated the new dock planks. One evening, after the day's work was done, I stood on the fresh porch overlooking the water. The sky was painted in streaks of gold and lavender. The lake glowed like a living thing. In my hand was a picture frame, charred at one edge but still holding strong. Denise's smile gazed back at me. I placed it gently on the mantel inside the new cabin. Still here, I whispered. The breeze rustled through the pines, soft and warm. Somewhere across the lake, a loon sang its long, lonely call. If anyone had asked what victory felt like, I would have told them this. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fierce. It was quiet, steady, like the lake at dawn. Justice, not vengeance. A home reclaimed, a man unbroken, and a neighborhood reminded of a truth they'd forgotten. You can steal a house, but you can't steal the land beneath a man's feet. You can steal a house, but you can't steal the land beneath a man's feet. If you've ever stood your ground against something unfair, drop a simple justice in the comments so folks know they're not alone. And if you'd ride with me through more stories like this, about dignity, grit, and fighting back the right way, go on and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.